The moment I saw Notre Dame Cathedral, I was taken aback by its size and its beauty. It is a magnificent structure built of stone, and it sits on its own island in the middle of Paris, France. Walking from the metro toward it, I could not take my eyes off of the cathedral. I passed bustling tourists, leisurely Parisians, cozy cafes, and opportunistic street artists, hoping that someone would purchase their art. Still, it all seemed to blur in my sightline as I approached Notre Dame, which seemed to grow with each step I took toward it. I hopped right into the line to climb the bell tower to the top. The chilly air nipped at my face, and there were at least 2 dozen people ahead of me waiting for their turn, but nothing would discourage me from going to the top. The minutes passed quickly in line as I watched people outside of the cathedral. I can't be sure how much time passed, but before I knew it, my group was allowed to enter. Immediately, we climbed a flight of stairs to the gift shop and to pay admission to the tower. Then it was time to ascend to the top, and the excitement fed me the adrenaline I needed. As I took each shallow step, I noticed how they had been rubbed and worn by visitors over the years. There was a slight curve in the center of each step. The natural sunlight peering through the window openings seemed to change the color of each step from gray to beige to caramel to vanilla. I had planned on keeping track of my step count, but eventually I lost count after everything started to look the same. I was starting to feel dizzy by the spiral climb, but then my group arrived at the bridge from the north tower to the south, which is just a little past halfway up. As I walked across the enclosed bridge, I looked down and was surprised that we were already high above the crowd on the ground. It was a welcome break from the steps, albeit a brief one. I was able to take in the view, which was just barely over the roofs of the neighboring buildings. Even though I sensed that the cathedral bell's chimes were a recording, my heart still swelled as I heard them play right next to us. Each chime loudly sang its tune across the Ile de la Cité, yet as the notes floated on the breeze that blew through the cathedral spire, they somehow softened for those of us who stood parallel to them. On the other side of the bridge, we were able to get an up-close look at the actual bells housed inside the towers. The large rooms where the bells resided were a stark contrast from the bright sunlight of Paris in April. I felt like I had stepped back in time looking around at the wooden beams above me and the massive brass bells. I half expected to see Victor Hugo's disfigured bell ringer Quasimodo peeking out from any dark corner. After taking a few photos, I walked back out onto the bridge and admired the intricately detailed gargoyles for a few minutes before proceeding along. I continued the journey up, taking step after step to the highest point of the cathedral. Emerging from the spiral staircase onto the top of the tower, I felt astonished by the altitude. The nearly 400-step climb that had led me to this point was not the only reason I found myself breathless. I was now well above the city and the view was stunning. Around every corner of this landing was an idyllic image of Paris. The tourists waiting in line below us looked the size of green army men toys. Scanning the hundreds of Parisian buildings, I was enamored by the beautiful and ornate architecture. The pale shading and the curved lines of the walls were still very apparent from this height. Even though Notre Dame is miles away from the Eiffel Tower, I could easily spot it. Standing in all its majesty across the city, I could almost hear it whisper bonjour to me. The most difficult part of the morning was not the physical exertion, but the visual stimulation. Where to look? Where to look? The elaborate carvings on the spire, the gorgeous skyline, or the sparkling Seine River, which transported ferries gently down her current. I knew I would never be able to capture the serene atmosphere and the glorious sights in photos, but after taking a few, I felt it was time to start making my way down. Unlike the way up, there are no breaks down the hundreds of steps. When I arrived at the bottom of the spiral staircase, I felt like my legs were going to buckle. All my limbs felt like jello for the rest of the day, but it was worth every step.